Yes.
All right, awesome. Let's get started. My name is Karen Caldwell. I'm a social studies and English language arts content and instructional coach. I also have been a high school social studies teacher teaching reluctant freshmen U.S. history. And I'm a teacher educator currently working at Oakland University in their College of Education. So this is a session on teaching our students how to use lateral reading, which is a way for them to determine the accuracy of information on the internet. So a Stanford University study in 2016 found that 82% of middle school students were unable to distinguish between sponsored content and a real news story on a website. And young people judged a website based on its relevance to their needs and its appearance. In other words, if it looked useful and good, it must be good. So when we think about literacy in social studies, there are 4 parts to that. The first is content literacy. So those are basic literacy strategies like main idea and details, summarizing, chronological order, analyzing the strength of an argument, disciplinary literacy. So this is reading like a historian, Sam Weinberg's work, reading like a geographer, reading like a economist, reading like a social scientist. And then there's critical literacy, which asks us to read multiple texts, often primary sources, to interrogate the values and ideologies underlying those texts. It's about understanding how power is constructed. And then media literacy, which is what we're going to look at today, the ability to critically analyze and evaluate the messages conveyed by various forms of media. So when we think about reading in social studies, there's 2 pieces to this. The first is close reading, which is a common core strategy, which is repeated careful reading of a text to develop an interpretation of the text, going deep. So you're looking at the Gettysburg Address, you're having the students really read it and parse out the meaning of the individual words. You are having them construct the vocabulary and think about what it means in the context of the time. And then there's lateral reading, searching for information about a source outside of the source while you're reading it. So you're verifying it back and forth as you're reading it. So that is going wide. So I would like everyone, please, I'm going to pop a link in the chat box. I would like you to please go to this website. I'll give everybody a minute to log on to it. And I'm going to give you 5 or 6 minutes to go through this website. You can scroll, you can click on any links, you can leave the site to access any information about it. I want you to evaluate this website for its reliability, its credibility, any biases it might have. If you were vetting this for your students, what would you do to prove that it was a good site? So go ahead and pop on there. It's 6:43. So why don't we convene back on this at 6:49, and then we'll talk about what you found. And let me know if you can't access the site at all. Hi, Lindsay. Since you just joined us, I'm going to put a link in the chat box. And what we're doing is we're going to the link in the chat box, and you're going to dig around on that website, scroll, click in it or out of it, and evaluate the website for its credibility, its reliability, any biases it might have. And then we're going to share out at 6:49. right, one more minute. All right, let's take a minute to talk about this website. If you want to unmute, there are, I think, a few of us, since there's only 9, we can just have a conversation and not use the chat. So what did you find out? Credible, reliable, biased, unbiased? What are your thoughts?
So there are a few things that I have my students look for. I teach 6th grade world geography. And one of them is it current? So I noticed at the bottom, it said 2020. It had a legit sounding title. There was a way to contact them. There were no ads that popped up. It had an about us section, but when I listened to the video, it talked to the phrasing of it was like, this feels like it's got a specific perspective. So talked about being dictated by social agendas. And then it talked about taking care of children from the moment of conception. And so I went to I just kind of said, what is the American College of Pediatricians? And it says it's a socially conservative advocacy group. So I think that for my kids, I would say, okay, so this is made up of pediatricians, but they also are on the conservative side of things. So if you're going to choose this site, you're going to probably want to look for other sources too, to validate the information that they are providing or to give a different perspective.
So where did you find the descriptor that it was a socially conservative site? Where did you go for that?
Oh boy, let me look.
Not to put you on the spot, Annette.
No, I don't remember. Let me look. I'm just going to pull it up real quick. Oh, if I can get that thing to move out of the way here. Go. So there is this. So what caught my attention was where did it go?
That's okay. I just thought if you would remember
it
where you had dug up the description, but that's okay.
Yeah, sorry, can't find it.
Who would like to add to Annette's findings, since you were all digging around on this website? What did you find? Additional thoughts? Would you use this in your classroom? How would you come to that decision? How did you find out information about the web page?
Sorry. I actually Googled before I read it.
Okay.
The American College of Pediatricians. And just looking through some of that page led me to understand that they were a controversial group.
Okay.
And then I went to a couple, like I look at All Sides a lot. So I went to All Sides and there were a couple of articles written by them, and they listed their bias as far right. So then I went back to kind of look at the articles, kind of knowing I don't know, maybe I created a bias for myself before I went and read the article when I think about it. But I'm just finding there was so many things out there nowadays. I tend to try to figure out who's talking before I read it. I don't know.
Right. And that's the thing that our students don't do, right? They Google it and they just dive in. And if it looks good, then they use it without doing what we do as adults and as teachers, which is to ask who is speaking and how that person is positioning us. Lindsay, I see you unmuted. What did you come up with?
Yeah, I found the thing listing them as being conservative is Wikipedia.
Okay.
When I Googled the organization as well. And then there's a lot of headlines talking about them being anti-LGBTQ. And then there were other things in there that I can't remember who wrote them, but there were also some other things in there saying that they have been established for a long time and they're a leading pediatric authority. I'm kind of making that up because I'm not looking at it anymore, but
it's okay.
So there were some things on both sides, but they definitely had some headlines, like I think Tom was saying in the Google page, of like headlines of articles talking about that organization's biases.
So you will be amazed when there was a study done in 2016 that asked professional fact checkers, historians, and students to assess this website versus the American Academy of Pediatrics. And why the fact checkers all figured out what the three of you did, only 10% of the historians did. Which is amazing, right? Because we are so into this idea of close reading that we're going to source it, we're going to collaborate it, we're going to contextualize it, we're going to dig deep into it. But when we use disciplinary literacy practices, then we end up not fact checking, right? And the professional fact checkers all figured out what you did, is that this website, it could be used, but should be used with caution, right? Because it is positioning the reader in a certain way. And as long as you know that, that's fine. But if you were to take it as gospel, then you wouldn't be okay.
Yeah,
all right.
I think it's like when I was teaching my students about Wikipedia. Just because it's Wikipedia doesn't mean it's all wrong, but you really got to proceed with caution, making sure that the information is vetted and verifiable.
And that's
I was going to say, I do that too. Sometimes I'll say, please don't use Wikipedia as your ultimate source, but it's okay if you start there, just to kind of get your feelers pointed in different directions, right? So, and I kind of explained to them how Wikipedia works, but it's just, don't use that as your ultimate source. You need to find other sources. And sometimes if you don't know where to start, you can start with Wikipedia and that will point you in some other directions.
And Wikipedia is a great backgrounder. Like if you know absolutely nothing about something and you just need it in a nutshell, you can read Wikipedia to kind of get your bearings on the subject, right? And then either go down into the sources and actually go back to the sources or go other places. But it is helpful for students to kind of get that overview, right? As long as they don't stay there.
Right.
Tom?
Yeah. So I do a lot of civics work and a lot of work equity wise too. And something that I found really helpful for me is when I'm at a site, because all the sites look good nowadays. And we used to tell kids if it looks professional and it'll have a .org or a whatever.
Right.
But I go to the About Us page a lot. And then you can see like who the board members are. And I might like search one of those people or, just to see if I can find out more information that way.
Right. To be curious and skeptical, right? And so that gets Tom into this next thing. The traditional questions we used to ask, is the domain a .gov, .org, or .edu, right? That used to be like the gold standard. If it's, not a .com, it's all good, right? Is there about an About Us page? Is there a Contact Us page? Is a site free from grammatical errors and broken links? Does it look good? Has it been recently updated? Annette, that's one of the things that you have your students start with, right? Like, how old is this page? And does the site contain advertisements? So those used to be like the way that we would say, is this website good? But like you pointed out, Tom, every website looks good now, and pretty much every website meets these criteria. So to take it to the next level, we have to ask, who funds or sponsors this site? Who's the voice behind the voice? What's the purpose of the site? How current is it? I mean, that's not just when it's been updated, but how current is the research underlying it if it has a references page? Who authored it? What are their credentials and affiliations? So that's what you're talking about, checking out the board member, right? Or if you see an article on a website, checking out that author. you should be able to go on to ResearchGate or someplace else and find their professional biography if they're a legitimate researcher. What are the sources for the information on the site? Is there a sources or reference page? And for our high school students, we can teach them what it means to look at a peer-reviewed journal. That you can have a source, but the question is, what is the source? How quality is that source? And what websites are linked to this site? If you follow the links and you poke around, where does it take you? So the goals of lateral reading is to read the texts in context. How are they connected to other texts? So when we looked at the American College of Pediatrics, we found out that it was, in essence, an offshoot of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It did break off in 2002 because it had a disagreement with the American Academy of Pediatrics over adoption by same-sex couples. That's what caused the splintering. And why the American Academy of Pediatrics has 64,000 members, has 400 and some people on staff, this splinter group that we looked at that looks so official actually only has about 400 members. It's a very small slice of pediatricians. And to determine who's behind the information being presented. And so there's a great quote here: lateral readers don't spend time on the page or site until they've first gotten their bearings by looking at what other sites and resources say about the source they're looking at. So that's all facts or all sides. It's Wikipedia, it's PolitiFact, all of those places. So when we teach our students to do this, we want to first tell them that they're going to take their bearings. They should go to the About Us page to get the organization's name, and then right away open a new tab and look at Google or Wikipedia or some of these other places to figure out who this organization is and what they stand for, what they represent. And then they can also find out about who funds it and what its reputation is and what are its biases. Some places to have your kids look are down here at the bottom. There's the classic Google and Wikipedia, but also Snopes, PolitiFact, Fact Check, All Sides, and NPR has a fact check website. All of these are good places to look and have your students check out whether or not the site is legitimate and what its biases are. And then you want the students to verify what they read as they read it. So you're popping in and out the website, and as things raise red flags for you, like Annette said, you start to read it and you're like, this is a little off here from what I'm thinking this site should say, then you're popping out into another web page and investigating that. So you're verifying it as you read it. And then we want to teach our kids to exercise what we call click restraint, that Google will show you the first 2 lines or so of a website. They don't need to open every single page to figure out what it does. That's why it shows you the preview, but the kids just open it. They also tend not to go past the first 4 or 5 things on a Google page. Encourage your students to go onto like the second page of the Google search. They'll often find more specific information because the algorithm is driving certain searches towards the top. All right, before we go to the next one, we're going to take a look at this website analysis tool, which I will also put in the chat box in just a minute. And you can use this with your students. I made it. Feel free to use it, modify it, adapt it, discard it, ignore it at your pleasure. It is a tool and you can do whatever you would like with it. But it's basically a cheat sheet for your students to go through and work through it. It asks, who's the author? What do we know about them? Who funds the site? What do we know about that organization? What's the purpose? Who's the audience? What does the author want them to do? Every website has a purpose. And it's really a great tool to get the students to think, what does this website want me to do? Or what does it want me to believe? What are the sources of information and its biases? What are other sites saying? And then to have the students conclude by determining how credible or reliable it is. So I will pop that into the chat. I'm going to put it in. We'll see if it will let me put it in. That is not happening. All right, I don't know why it's not letting me put that tool in. If you would like, you can, I will put this in the documents folder on the conference webpage where you can attach documents to your profile. I will put this tool in here. In the meantime, I'm going to leave it up on the screen. as soon as I give you this web page. We're going to go do one more. So I'd like you to go to the speechfirst.org. And I'll put this in here. And then think about all the things that we just discussed and looked at and all the questions on the worksheet, the analysis tool. And take 5 or 6 minutes to pop into this one. I'm going to unshare and reshare so that you can see the tool. All right, can you see the tool on the web page on the screen? Awesome. All right. Go take a poke at the speechfirst.org. In this case, I want you to particularly focus on who is funding this web page. Who is the voice behind the voice, if you can figure that out. And let's see, it's 7:04. Let's go to about 7:10. Okay, but 1 more minute for your investigation. All right, let's start with our first questions here. Again, since it's just a small handful of us here, we are the small but proud and mighty. Who's the author of this website? And what do we know about this person or organization? Hey, Ann. Lindsay?
I just searched for I looked at the website, but if we're trying to figure out who's funding it and that kind of thing, I figured probably need to go somewhere else to figure that out. So
Okay.
I searched in Google for who funds speechfirst.org, and I got a couple of Sourcewatch, or like there's a website called sourcewatch.org, and there's another one, Influence Watch, who talk about where money comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So what I found out is that this organization was created around 2018 by one person. I found out their goal was to protect free speech for students on college campuses. And they have ties to, is it the Koch brothers? That the person who created it won't disclose who donates to it because they receive donations. But this website looked into tax records to figure out who else was donating money to them. And they have copies of tax documents on their website.
What site is that you're using, Lindsay? That sounds fascinating.
It's called sourcewatch.org.
Yep.
It looks a lot like Wikipedia though, so I didn't really get to who the sources are of this information yet, but those tax documents are right above it. And they aren't just photographs, they're like, there's 32 pages, 34 pages, 21 for each document of tax. They look like tax IRS forms.
All right. What else did we find out? Anybody else want to add to Lindsay's digging into the finances? That was awesome. Thank you.
Well, when I was looking at the people that are part of this, they had like their staff. I went down the rabbit hole of Trump because Charisse Trump was the first person listed. And I thought, okay, let's see if there's a connection with Donald Trump. And I searched for that for a while. They couldn't find anything. So then I noted that they were quoting Fox News, that they use the term woke in capital letters. And then one of the news items that they were sharing was entitled Equity Unless You're a Conservative. And so those were all flags that told me that this is probably a conservative leaning site.
Okay, great digging on that one. Just kind of picking up on that close reading, right? Looking at the actual words and thinking about words matter, right? There's a difference, for example, between an undocumented worker and a legal alien. Same person, right? But how we choose what words we use have power. And so looking at the words on the website gave you some clues. Tom, what'd you find?
Well, the close reading, one article talked about the woke mob underground, which gets you thinking. And I looked at some of those other sites too, and then I don't know if Sourcewatch is good or not, but Charity Navigator was there. So I went and checked on Charity Navigator, and they basically say we can't rate them because they won't tell us anything about
right.
who's. So that just made me kind of skeptical of the group right there.
Right. Most reputable charities disclose to you all the sources of their funding, and they tell you what percentage goes to administrative operations and what percentage goes to directly support the charity, right? So that's one of the ways you can judge the value of a charity. And we all learned that after 9/11, and then again with the pandemic and other, Hurricane Katrina, to use those sites to check where the money is going. And so if you can't track where the money is coming from or where it's going, that's sometimes a red flag, right? What else do we find out about this site that was interesting? Something that just struck you as being something that you might want to consider as towards its credibility or reliability or the biases it might have. Tom?
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Oh, it's okay. You were unmuted. I thought you were.
Yeah, I didn't remute myself. Sorry.
It's okay. What struck me as very odd about this website is that it purports to be an organization, but it's really a single person, right? And this particular website is an example of what we call astroturfing. So astroturfing is this concept where an organization looks like it's a grassroots organization that's a concerned group of citizens getting together about an issue, but it's really an individual, or it's driven by a PAC or a political party. And so it's kind of masking itself as a grassroots organization, hence the jokey term astroturf, right? Fake grassroots organization. So that's something to also teach your students when their lateral reading is check the funding. You can use Sourcewatch or the charity evaluating websites, but you should also have them look up and see if it's an astroturf website. So if it's masquerading as something it's not. So if you were to use this in your classroom, how would you frame this for your students? So Annette had said earlier about the American College of Pediatrics that she would have her students think about where it's coming from. Not that they couldn't use it, but they would need to corroborate or verify what was on that website from other places in order to consider using it, right? To strike that balance in the information. How would you frame this website?
For this one, I would take it from the perspective of this one is very clearly conservative. So you're going to want to look for a site that is liberal so you can see the other perspective, which I think is really valuable. I tell my kids all the time, I said, if you watch CNN at home all the time, you should pop over to Fox News too and see what they're saying. And sometimes you're going to wonder if they're actually talking about the same thing. And they just thought that was really surprising. And I said, that's one way to really kind of see what both sides are thinking.
Right. And that's one of the ways that we can evaluate websites too, is that we don't ever want to tell our students that they shouldn't use something, right? But you should think about how you're going to use it. Right? In what context? As researchers, as historians, as economists, as geographers, we want to consider all the information, but we also want to make sure we're considering all perspectives and that we're getting our students to make some judgments about how these websites are positioning them as readers and what some of their biases might be. They can't balance something if they don't see the bias in it to begin with, right? It's not possible to get balance if you don't know what you're balancing. So that is the purpose of lateral reading. So I did put the website analysis tool on the conference page where you can load documents underneath your profile. So if you go to my profile, you can snag that tool. Apparently it will not let me directly load it into chat. So here are some great places for lesson plans. If you're going to teach your students how to laterally read, commonsense.org has a really great series of scaffolded lesson plans, where it has students go through advertisements, which are obviously biased, and then work their way through to sites that are in disguise, astroturf sites. So that's a really good one. Stanford Education, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with for the Stanford History Education Project. They also have lessons in there about lateral reading. Newslit.org has some great lessons as well, and also facinghistory.org. So all of these places have some really nice lessons about determining the bias, finding the funding, checking the sources, and teaching your students how to laterally read. How many of you are fans of Crash Course the crash course videos? You are? Yep. So you should know that there's a great video. Check yourself with lateral reading, crash course navigation. So that is a little 13-minute crash course video, but it actually does a really nice job of explaining what lateral reading is and giving the students the examples. And for once, he doesn't talk 1,000 miles a minute like he does in the crash course videos. Because this is a skill video, he's not trying to shove every bit of history in the video. And so he actually opens the video with a really nice explanation of who funds crash course videos, like which organizations fund it, like he and his brother own crash course videos and who funds it and which associations give them money. And he tells the students, and you didn't know all of that, but that was important for you to know. And so he opens it by dissecting crash courses, biases, and contributors. So that is a really great one as well. So now that we've had this conversation about lateral reading and we've practiced a little bit and dug into these two websites and looked at this tool, how are you going to use lateral reading in your classroom? What are some of the ideas you got from this evening that you might be able to use with your students in this next week?
Maybe not in the next week, but I teased world geography, and we do a whole unit on migration.
Okay.
And so, of course, immigration into the United States is a hot button issue. So I feel like this would be, before we even start talking about immigration, that this would be a great thing to do, is to dive into the different perspectives about that and using these tools.
Yeah, and procon.org, of course, is the classic place where you can find two perspectives, but they often just list the perspectives in those little colored boxes without giving you the actual source, right? And so having the students go to the original website and parse it out for themselves is deepening their skill level. Lindsay, how are you going to use this in your classroom?
So I just finished doing a whole unit on research in my 6th grade social studies geography class. And it wasn't on anything controversial. It was on natural disasters.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took them through the steps of how do you figure out if a source is credible or not. But it probably would be good next time around to have them experiment with some of these sites and actually, instead of me just telling them like, these are things that are credible, these are things that are not. One of the things that they had a really hard time with was, in the past, they've used websites with previous elementary teachers where it was a teacher who had made the website.
Oh, okay.
So there was a ton of information on there, and it likely was all correct. But I kept telling, like, we had a hard time figuring out, like, okay, so, but who is this person, and are they an authority on the topic, or are they just someone who's thrown a bunch of information together for you? Mm-hmm. And being able to figure out like who's really behind it. So it would be good to go through and actually figure out like, okay, so what are the credentials of the people who are building these websites? And if we can't figure out who that is, even if it looks okay, that's a great place to, get some ideas, but it's not a great place to cite in your research or to rely on heavily, because there are other people who are authorities on topics that you should be checking with.
Yeah, and that gets back to that first piece or second piece of research that said, well, students say if it looks good and it has what they need, then it's good enough. Right?
Yeah,
well, and so they find.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, they trust it because their previous teachers had said, go here.
Right.
And it's made by a teacher, so it seems reliable, but trying to pick resources that you can vet is a better place to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's that whole idea of when the teachers pay teachers thing, right? Like you can go on Teachers Pay Teachers and find something amazing that someone has really put a lot of thought and effort into it, and then you can just go find worksheets. Mm-hmm. And people kind of assume that since it's on Teachers Pay Teachers and another teacher created it, that it's of the same quality, and it's not, right? The quality varies greatly among the materials and the topics. And it's the same thing with the websites. The students are just assuming that someone put it out there who was a teacher, and therefore they trust the teacher and they're trusting the teacher to have vetted it. And I think sometimes students forget that we're really busy humans And that we don't stay up 24 hours a day, making web pages, right? Tom, how are you going to use this in your classroom?
Well, I don't have a classroom. I work with teachers.
Okay.
And what I'm thinking right now is that second site, honestly seems really dangerous to me to like give to kids and have them work through it. Honestly, because it is so well done, I feel like kids would get sucked into it. And some kids who are already listening to podcasts like that and having those, it would almost be confirmation bias for them. So I was wondering about maybe pulling out one of the articles from there and a comparable article from another source and like doing that first and then going into that kind of a site. Would that be useful or?
I mean, I think it's a great way to in essence, to do what Nanette was talking about, balancing, right? But you could actually use lateral reading to teach balance. You could go out and find 2 sites that address the same topic that were on from different perspectives and have your students spend 10 minutes or so on each site and use that web analysis tool and have them compare the sites and point out all the strengths and all the challenges with each site and say, all right, how reliable, how credible, how would you use these? Would you recommend them? And have the students actually critically figure out on their own that no website is perfect, right? And the two websites in the same topic are going to have these different perspectives and these different funders. And then that's a great conversation to have about, this is why you have to be an educated consumer of the internet.
Yeah, well, and I think you said something really key in there that helps me think about this. Give them a limited amount of time on the site. Give them 10 minutes to explore the site and then go look laterally. Otherwise,
right,
you can get swallowed by that site.
Right, you go down the rabbit hole. And you can even put a time limit on the, when you frame it as a challenge, tell me everything you can about the author, about the funding, about the biases, and you put a time limit on it. Students will, and you remind them that they can click off the site, they're more likely to go do that search and look on PolitiFact or NPR's Fact Check, or to go on All Sides, or to go on Snopes or Wikipedia or Google, because they're going to be in a hurry for the information. And the joke, too long didn't read, right? And so the students will not want to stay on the website because you've given them a challenge and there's a finite amount of time. So this is definitely something where you don't want to give students a half an hour to go digging.
Thank you. That's a really helpful tip.
Yeah, for the 2 sites that we looked at, it took fact checkers less than 2 minutes to find the things that you did and to get a little deeper. It took historians about 3 times as long, 6 minutes, and it took students, like not graduate students, but high school students, more than 20 minutes. So part of this too is learning to be an efficient consumer of the internet, right? And not to get bogged down in all of this research. It's because the students just go into the site and they just get deeper and deeper into it, and they're doing that close reading and they're not leaving. So great ways, great ideas to use things in the classroom. And of course, Sourcewatch and Charity Watch, also good places to go. If you're interested in some more of this research, there is on the last slide, which will also be posted, there's a great study by Weinberg, Breakstone, McGrew, and Ortega that talks about evaluating information. And this is where some of this work originally came from. And then lateral reading, the nature of expertise, also a Weinberg study, and his work is on the Stanford History Education Group website as well. So you can get links to his articles. All right, what questions might you have for me before we part company for the evening? Everybody's good?
Where did you say that we could access your things? Because the different sessions is like plopped a link into the chat, but where do we go to get your presentation?
So it should be loaded. It will, the slideshow I will put on where there's a spot called documents underneath the presenter profile. So if you go to the conference homepage, the web analysis tool is already there, but I will go ahead and put this presentation in here as soon as we log off. And so that will be accessible to you, 10 minutes or so after we log off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem. All right, we are due to be out of this room in 1 minute before we get kicked out. It was such a pleasure working with you this evening. I hope you enjoy the what's left of our chilly spring evening, and that I might see you tomorrow at the conference.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen.
All right, thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
All right, night.